just tuning in for a couple minutes and getting a bit of uplift, a bit of subvention, if you will, from me here, your host, David Tulis, where we cover local economy and the free market. I was having a conversation in church yesterday about the idea of resistance and the idea of submission. When should Christians submit? When should we recognize that we're not in a free country and simply submit, simply bow down and lie down and accept being walked over, accept abuses of other people? Because after all, we can't really help them either. We're in a servitude. And my reaction was tempered somewhat by the comment that, well, most of the comments we get about resisting and demanding one's rights and standing on the truth and standing on one's rights and even one's privileges, those are not in the Bible. Those are from libertarians. Those are from founding fathers. And that's not really something that we can find directly from the scriptures. But I think immediately of Peter saying, well, shall I obey God or man, when I'm told that no, I can't preach in Christ's name. I ask this question because there are many times where those are in subjection are not cowed. They're not going to bow before Nebuchadnezzar. They're not going to bow before his idol. Daniel prayed openly in the window, and the three Israelites who were to be burned to death for not bowing were not going to give in either to what could be called lawful authority. But now there is a distinction to be made between lawful and unlawful authority. In the scriptures, you can see that there's unlawful authority to worship, and it is rejected by the faithful. And in our country, we have this question of, should we just submit and accept things as they are, which are brutal. They are brutal and highly progressive, right? The damage of the police state against individuals, 1,000 people killed every year by the police. This is a progressive victory, right? This is progress, and this has been brought to us by the Democratic Party and the Republican Party as well, both of which are very pro-police. And most people, probably you, my listener, are pro-police. And so what is a Christian to do? Should he really stand on his rights, and should he insist on being treated according to law, or should he just say, well, you know, the law may be there, but this officer clearly doesn't understand the law, and I don't really either. So I think I just better submit and just try to hope for the best in this encounter, and not stand on my rights, not demand probable cause or anything like that. That's just making trouble. He's going to get angry at me. He's going to start threatening me. He may try to kill me. Right? We have this many times where officers kill people, shooting them to death. People who then, of course, as they're dying with 10 bullet wounds, their hands are tied behind their backs by the cuffs, just to make sure they don't bite in their death throes. Well, when does one say, I can't fight it any longer, I'm going to just submit? And when does one say, I'm going to defend that person over there who's innocent, or I'm going to defend myself? I'm innocent. I've done no wrong. I've hurt no one. I've violated no statute. I have violated no ordinance. And no, please, you can't do that to me. No, I'm not going to let you do that. That's a different position. Are we being realistic when we do things about which I write a great deal, and that is understanding the law and understanding your rights in the law? So, for example, the Airbnb story that we covered a couple weeks ago, the city ordinance being unconstitutional and illegal, right? It's an illegal ordinance on several points. Is there a homeowner who's going to say, well, I think I need to go ahead and become the victim of this ordinance so that I can challenge it, right? Because if you're not turned into a victim, if you're not injured by an unlawful law, then you can't challenge it. And you can't challenge it for your benefit and for the benefit of other people. You have to be willing to submit to injustice to have standing. That's called standing. It's a legal concept, and that it's a legal concept because if you have standing, then you can challenge the law. And think if there, the law, the ordinance is damaging to the free market in the ownership of property, right? We're talking here about houses owned by private people, not houses owned by Wall Street which is the story last week in the Wall Street Journal, page 1, how Wall Street has become the biggest landlord across the country. Investment houses, buying houses and then renting them out. Well, if a house is rent by a company, that's different from a house lent or let by a homeowner who lives there and who's maybe gone for a couple weeks or a couple months. The house is put on the rental market by Airbnb, the platform. So there's a distinction there between privately owned houses and corporately owned houses, because the personal rights are greater than the rights of a corporation, I would say. Just read Hill versus Hinkle, the most quoted opinion from the U.S. Supreme Court, cited more than any other case about that distinction between the private person and the corporation. So here we have an ordinance which is illegal. And how do you, now, the man asked me this question at lunch yesterday at church. How do I deal with that question? Shouldn't we just accept that we live in a lawless time? Shouldn't we just not accept that the government does not obey its limits? The government does not care about the Constitution. The government does not care about the people. On the city council, even the conservatives don't care about the people. The conservatives, the man who wrote the overlay map, Chip Henderson, a conservative man, right? You would say he's Republican, generally conservative, generally favors the marketplace. But here, because he wanted to have a plan, he filed his ordinance that everyone approved except Demetrius Coonrod, who said no. Everyone approved of this conservative plan to illegally regulate the internet, to put a wall of Beijing around Chattanooga in the marketplace of short-term vacation rentals. That's what happened. It is illegal. It is unlawful, and it makes ridiculous the whole gig city idea. How can we have a gig city celebrating gig speeds on EPB internet when we have a Beijing wall around a very important and lucrative marketplace that raises valuations of houses where these Airbnb platforms exist, right? A house that's an Airbnb house is going to be better kept, better maintained than if it were just privately used. And so we have an ordinance which is against the concept of the marketplace. It's against liberty. It is arbitrary and capricious, and it presumes far more of the punitive effect of the $50 fine rule than is warranted. It is the $50, the $500 per day fine, or the $50 per day fine, is simply unconstitutional. And that is because cities do not have punitive powers. Cities do not have punitive powers, according to City of Chattanooga versus Myers and City of Chattanooga versus Kevin Davis, two important cases that put the city in its place, both dealing with Chattanooga. Chattanooga cannot fine anybody $50 a day, period. And Wade Hinton let this go. Wade Hinton thinks that the city can get away with it. And that's a calculation he's making. He's a lawyer who should know better. He should care about the interests of the people, not the interests of his client. The client is the city corporation and the city council that has hired him to be its attorney. So he's letting its members get away with effectively a tort, and he's letting the ordinance go through. Now, should we be brave or should we cower? Should we resist, or should we simply say, well, I guess I can't do Airbnb because there's an ordinance that says I can't. There's an ordinance that puts me outside of the overlay map, and I'm just going to have to sit quietly, maybe for a year, maybe for longer, with no means of redress, no means of appeal. All right, that's what happened in this ordinance. It allows no redress. There's no way to get out. The door for rezoning was shut by the ordinance. It shut down the R3, R4 zoning appeal process that would let someone, quote, legally, unquote, be an Airbnb provider in Chattanooga. So the overlay map is simply, and John Bridger, the planning agency, illegal. Donna Williams, the enforcement officer in the Economic Development Bureau of Mayor Andy Burke, all happy with a lawless law. It is a lawless law. Shall we accept it? Shall you accept it? So what I'm trying to get at here is a question of whom do you fear? And I think people today Americans are, though violent, they are an extraordinarily compliant people. And that is because culturally we've lost our identity. We've lost a sense of purpose. We've lost virility, right? We are not manly, virile men and women. We are emasculated. We don't have We don't have testosteronal fortitude. We don't have strength to say, no, I'm simply not going to do that. Or no, I'm not going to accept that kind of imposition against my rights. These are against my rights and against the rights of hundreds of other people on the point of this Airbnb lawless ordinance. Well, the question now is, if you are the victim, you are going to insist on your rights, and you're going to go ahead and you're going to become the topic of target of enforcement action by Donna Williams at the Economic Development Office, right? You're trying to enter into the free market, and Donna Williams is going to try to shut you down as part of economic development. Well, to be in that position requires courage. It requires conviction, and it requires a sense of being right. It requires a sense that you are innocent and harmless and have done no wrong to anybody, including violating the ordinance. So that's what it takes. It requires someone to violate the ordinance and to have standing. If you have standing, then you can defeat the whole thing. And my answer to the man across from me at the table on the Lord's Day was that the defendant is a representative. He has a ministry. It effectively is a prophetic ministry. And it could be that it could be that even a person who is a person who you may not agree with on politics or on gay orientation or anything like that, someone who's in that position who says, I'm going to stand on my rights. It doesn't matter about your other parts of your life, okay? It doesn't really matter whether you're a Christian or non-Christian, whether you're gay or straight, or whether you're a Democrat or Republican. Those issues don't matter. It doesn't matter whether you're a successful business person or not. It doesn't matter whether you beat your wife or not. It doesn't matter whether you're an adulterer or not. Those things are aside on this point of standing on your rights under this ordinance. And so you are then a representative of all people in like standing with you. Those would be the hundreds, even thousands of homeowners who have a right, who may have a desire to enter the Airbnb marketplace, the short-term vacation rental marketplace. And so the one who says no and becomes the victim of the process is the representative. In my mind, that's a prophetic ministry. And just as Hanson Melvin, the Walking While Black defendant, and now he's a plaintiff in a $500,000 civil case against the city, and Officer David Campbell, he represents his people. Now, he's black, and so when he hears that, he's thinking that I'm referring to black people. Well, he is, but he's also a representative of every other innocent person who is walking down the street, as he was when he was arrested while walking, refusing to give his driver license and refusing to give his Social Security number. The fact that the police department asked for a Social Security number is truly bizarre, and I think you, my listeners, should not cooperate. If you give information, I think probably you have only to give your name, address, and your date of birth. That's probably the most you have to give, if that. Okay, they need to. If they're stopping you, they need to have a warrant for your arrest. They need to have something, a search warrant for your car or your house. There has to be something more than just, hey, I want to know who you are. Give me your ID. Well, ID can be given orally, and so long as it's true, you're in good shape. And so Hanson Melvin, reproached and approached and hassled by David Campbell and a whole bunch of other officers later in that day. He represents the innocent, right? He represents common people, and he's standing up for his rights. And so, should we just collapse? Should we just give in? I think we shouldn't. Now, let's just to get to some of the news here. And I'm running out of time. There's a story last year out of the Tennessean that has a reference to a study about black people in the face of 2 million traffic stops, and it was found that in a report, 200-page report called "Driving While Black," it was released in October of 2016 by a group called Gideon's Army, run by a man named Rashidat Fituga. And there were several findings. Black people are stopped more frequently than others. Black drivers are 27.6% of the city's population, but make up 39% of all traffic stops. While 63% of the population is white, white drivers are involved in 55% of stops. Police stop black drivers so often, it's equal to 112% of the African-American driving population. In 2015, 79% of stops ended with a warning. Of the 6% of drivers who received a state citation, black drivers were 3.1 times more likely than white to receive the citation. And that may be a racist problem, a problem of race, but it may also be a problem of just lack of respect. The officer doesn't think that a black person is worth anything, so he doesn't have to have rights that the officer has to scrupulously protect. And that is a habit. That becomes a habit of mind. The officer he's not there to protect you anymore. He's not there to protect your rights. He's there to invade your rights and to bluff his way into getting some kind of concession, admission, or cause that will allow him to do a DUI or a drug stop. That's what they want. Every stop has in view DUI or drugs, and officers fabricate these kinds of stops a great deal. It's very common for officers, I'm speaking generally here, to do that. And so if you have a low view of black people and you keep involved, you're involving yourself in stopping them without probable cause, it becomes a habit. And in the end, you're not caring any more about the people. You're caring just about your authority, and you don't want anything to thwart that authority. You don't want anything to get between you and satisfaction, which is to say, I get everything I want from you, even though I don't have probable cause, and even though you don't even know you're under arrest, but you are. See, that's what's happening. I do want to make a recommendation. I've been listening to some lectures by a former deputy, a former American military man, and he has been discussing transportation stops. These are, of course, in transportation, and I'm doing some new reading in the Tennessee Code on this question of what transportation is, as opposed to what is travel. This is in light of our important coverage at Nooganomics.com of the travel versus transportation issue. It's come to a head in the Court of Appeals in Nashville. 6 days ago, there were major arguments made for the right of travel. And the question raised about the 1936 Driver License and Chauffeurs Act, Operators and Chauffeurs Act. And it's this. Here's the question. Did that act abrogate any constitutional right of travel? Well, if it didn't, then the state and all of its agents have to recognize that there are people who are not in commerce, not involved in transportation, who are traveling, and they can't be stopped for commercial reasons. These people are in cars, in trucks, and on motorcycles. Now, if the statute did abrogate these rights, then the whole thing's unconstitutional. So if the answer is no, it did not abrogate those rights, then the police have to recognize the traveling public, okay? If the answer is yes, it did abrogate those rights, then the whole statute has to be thrown out. And that's the way the question that was poised before the court on Tuesday. You can read about that at Nooganomics.com, the only website, the only media platform in the whole state that sees this issue correctly, okay? This is an issue that is hard to see. But if you read what I suggest or read what I report, you will understand a profound truth about property rights and constitutional limits on government. The government has operated 80 years as if there were no right of travel, and yet it is a common right. And in fact, last night, rather than reading my Bible, I yielded to temptation and read some in the Tennessee Code. I did a little search on the word traveling and travel in the TCA through LexisNexis. You can do that online. And traveling clearly is something about liberty. Traveling is a liberty that people exercise. It comes up in travel expenses. It comes up in the nature of highways. It also comes up in the purpose of transportation regulation, which is not travel. Because travel is the exercise of a right. Transportation is regulable. It is subject to regulation, as the statute says, because it oversees the damage to the public by heavy trucks, right? Commerce, danger to the public from accidents. And so regulation is required of commerce. It's understandable that it's over commerce, probably too much it is, but it is understandable and defensible. But private people riding privately, they are not subject to regulation. They are not subject to police stops. They're not subject to transportation stops. But we're so used to transportation stops that we don't see our way out. We can't see our way out. Though I think if you listen to Eddie Craig at ruleoflawradio.com, Rule of Law Radio, you can see the problem maybe just a little bit. Now, I'm not, this is the Minority Report, and I'm not expecting everybody just to suddenly give up their driver licenses. I'm not suggesting that, but I think we need to understand the issue before people can, in principle, stand and make a case out of it. There need to be more cases like this. And we need to have officers enforcing lawful laws against people lawfully subject to those statutes, but not other people, right? We don't want there to be law enforcement against people against whom there is not a law in effect. This is David Tulis, Nooga Radio. We've got Essential Health next. Essential Health in just a couple minutes. Got next, CBS News.
Nooga Radio, AM 1240, 92.7 FM.
Now, me being a